There's no denying that Crimson Desert is one of the most unique experiences ever made in gaming. I don't think there's a single game out there that rivals its size, scope, breadth, and depth of features, while also boasting one of the most detailed and gorgeous open worlds we've ever seen. Constantly throughout my playthrough of this game, I was left with just one word constantly ringing in my head: wow. Whether that's from climbing to the top of a mountain and seeing the entire world beneath my feet, knowing that I could go to any place my gaze reaches, or whether that's with the more intimate and quiet scenes when I'm riding my horse through an idyllic mountainside village, or a beautiful fall town that rivals the color palette of a game like Ghost of Yotei, or whether that's with the flashiness and fluidity of a combat system built to look cool but also play really well. There's no denying that Crimson Desert in many ways is the most ambitious game to be put out in the 21st century. It's just held back by one of the most measly, lackluster, and incoherent messes of a story I've ever played. The bread and butter of this game is exploration and combat, and if the game stuck to these guns and made these aspects of the game the sole focal point, I would have no problem calling this the greatest game of the generation. But Pearl Abyss, the developers of Crimson Desert, made it a point to showcase the story at every turn. There are over 500 quests in this game, and almost all of them suck bad. But even so, I think for the most part, Crimson Desert's good outweighs the bad in almost all instances. So today, buckle up, it's going to be a long one. Let's talk about Crimson Desert, what I liked, what I think could be improved, and why Crimson Desert is the greatest game I never want to play again. Before we begin, if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that like button and please consider subscribing to see more content like this. Now let's get back to the video. Let's start with Crimson Desert's defining trait, the world. I think Crimson Desert's world is, simply put, one of a kind. I do not think there is a game world out there right now that can compete with what Crimson Desert has to offer. Pywell, the region of the world that this game is set in, is shockingly large, shockingly beautiful, and shockingly detailed. There are games out there that excel in one or two of these areas. The Witcher 3 is both incredibly detailed and beautiful, but its three regions combined are not nearly as big as Pywell. Red Dead Redemption 2 features a massive open world and once again is beautiful, but does not feature the same density of detail that Pywell is able to. Skyrim is incredibly large and still packed with secrets to this day, and yet the game, even for its time, was quite behind graphically. All this to say, what Pearl Abyss has done with the sheer scope, size, and beauty of this world shouldn't be possible. There are graphical hiccups here and there. I think interior lighting is broken right now, resulting in extremely blotchy and squared textures, and the game, when transitioning from either daytime to nighttime or nighttime to daytime, loses a light source, making the textures and shadows incredibly flat. But those are things that can easily be fixed down the line, and the way Pearl Abyss has been cooking with the updates, I don't doubt they will. Moving on to the content of the world itself, I think if you were to ask me what the ideal game world and aesthetic would be, I think I would point to Crimson Desert. The game is broken up into 4 regions: Hernan, the starting region; Payloon, the home of the tribe you play as, the Greymanes; Demonis, the capital region; Crimson Desert, the expansive desert; and Delegia, the technological hub. Every single one of these regions is distinct and distinctly beautiful. It's one thing to be able to tell the difference between regions by making one the forest one, or the snow one, or the desert one. But that's not necessarily the case for Crimson Desert. A lot of the regions, particularly Demonis, Hernan, and Payloon, share a similar identity. They're grassy, forested, and have mountainous regions, but Pearl Abyss still found ways to make them feel distinct. The subtle change in foliage, or the slightly different animals you find in each region, or maybe the change in architecture and clothing of each region's inhabitants, all provide subtle cues into which region you're in. It's easy to look at the bottom left of your screen and see exactly which region you may be in, and it's very obviously easy to tell when you're in the Crimson Desert, but even when traversing through the regions that are relatively similar in actual structure and topography, I always kinda knew where I was, which I think is an incredible feat of game design by Pearl Abyss. The individual points of interest are also phenomenally done, albeit a bit gatekeeped. What I mean by that is that Crimson Desert offers unprecedented freedom when it comes to actually exploring the open world. From quite literally the beginning of the game, you can go wherever you want and see what the game has to offer, with some caveats. But while you might be able to go wherever you want, that doesn't necessarily mean you can do whatever you want. A lot of the individual points of interest are gated by quests that prevent you from experiencing them to the fullest. You might find a cool ice spire or a cool tower or a town that looks like it should really have something in it, but if you don't have the certain faction quest or the main quest that explicitly directs you to go to that place, you'll oftentimes find that the POI is rendered useless. These quests aren't really naturally found throughout the world either. The game has to explicitly decide you're at the point in the game where it'll unlock the quest for you, something I'll dive into more during the story section of the review. Now, that doesn't mean the POIs themselves aren't absolutely beautiful to look at or are inspiring on their own right, but still, it's a little disappointing nonetheless. I think a prime example of this is the Scalastone Institute. Tucked up in the mountains of Hernand, there's a university of giants, I forgot what the game calls them, dedicated to researching the Abyss, which is another material plane of the universe in the sky that only a few have access to. During Chapter 3, when I finally felt like I had a grasp on the basics and wanted to tackle some of the faction quests that had become available to me, I set out to explore all of Hernand to see what the game had to offer. One day, late at night, I came across this institute. I was in awe. I had climbed to the top of the mountain not in hopes to find a massive institute there, but rather to see the view from the top. To my pleasant surprise, I found the Scalastone Institute. I was so excited to explore it, to see if there was anyone I could talk to or any quests I could get to help those researchers out, but nothing. Every single NPC I tried to talk to had nothing interesting to say. And there was clearly a puzzle in the middle of the POI taunting me, but it just wasn't something I could interact with yet. I was disappointed that this hidden institute that I had found that had so much potential was basically non-interactable. It wasn't until Chapter 4 and dozens of hours later when I finally got the quest to actually check out the Scalastone Institute, and when I finally got there, the game treated it like it was my first time encountering the POI, and all the quests and side quests tied to that place finally opened up. I understand that this is an unfortunate side effect of building a beautiful world and wanting to allow the players to explore every bit of it without major restrictions, but still, I think adding side quests that could be accessed at any time just by discovering the place should have been something Pearl Abyss added. Back to the positives though, I think the cities and towns in this game are phenomenal. Y'all know I'm a stickler for a good game city. I need that thing to feel alive. I need NPCs walking around doing their daily routines. I need random interactions, and most of all, I need size and scale to have that plausibility that this is a real city. I think Crimson Desert hits on all fronts with this. There's nothing in this game that compares to the size and scale of, say, Kuttenberg from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, but the towns and cities that this game does have still have that immersive quality to them. They remind me a lot of Witcher 3's towns and cities, or even Red Dead Redemption 2. That cozy feeling of spending a day in Valentine, or Rhodes, or Strawberry, hitting the saloon, doing some shopping at the general stores, and then ending the night at the hotel was something that added so much immersion to the game. You got to roleplay as Arthur Morgan, and I think Crimson Desert and its towns invoke that same feeling in me. The environmental puzzles littered throughout the game's map are also a pleasant treat whenever you come across them. They're fairly common to find when exploring, but not too common as to feel overwhelmed by their presence. And I think the actual puzzles themselves are relatively well done. The game does a pretty bad job of telling you what gimmick or tool they want you to use to solve the puzzle, but once you're able to figure that out, the actual content of the puzzle itself tends to be pretty easy. I think Pearl Abyss could have provided in-game dialogue or on-screen hints as to what tool they want you to use to solve the puzzle, without explicitly spoiling how they want you to solve it. The reward once you complete the puzzle is oftentimes nothing too special, usually an Abyss artifact used to upgrade your character and unlock new skills in the skill tree, but if you dig a little deeper, push a little farther, oftentimes you'll find a chest hidden somewhere that does reward you with pretty cool and unique loot like armor or weapons. That little extra incentive to keep exploring and providing those cool and unique armor sets and weapons were the catalyst of my exploration during my playthrough. The last little bit about the world, and my last little critique, is that I think the game shoehorns you into Hernand for far too long. Even though you can technically go to any region you want as early as Chapter 5, the two bordering regions of Hernand, Payloon, and Demonis are essentially inaccessible due to hostile enemies. The lore reason is that those regions of the map are occupied by opposing forces, so naturally, you're not really able to go exploring in them. And that makes sense to some extent. If I see a guard from an opposing kingdom in, say, Demonis, they should be hostile towards me, but the problem is that these guards are everywhere. There's nowhere you can really go to in either of these regions without encountering hordes of respawning hostile enemies. On top of that, the restrictions to these regions don't open up until Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 of the main story, of which there are 12 total chapters. That's well over halfway into the game. And look, even as a guy who tends to stick around the area that the main quests are set in, if the main quests are set in Hernand and none of the faction quests take me outside of Hernand, I'm completely fine exploring everything Hernand has to offer and moving on to the other regions when the game tells me to. I still felt like I was stuck in Hernand for far too long. I had most of the region explored by Chapter 5 due to the copious amounts of side and faction quests, and between Chapters 6 and 7, I essentially mainlined the main quest to be able to explore the other regions, which was a bit frustrating. I wish exploration was just a bit more natural in regards to this. I'm fine with seeing hostile enemies from time to time, and having them be difficult fights due to the fact that the regions are later game regions, but at least let me attempt to explore them. Don't make it damn near impossible due to the amount of enemies. All in all, man, even despite some of my complaints, this is still by far the most technically impressive and gorgeous world I've ever experienced. Going into this game, I thought I knew what I was getting myself into with the world, and yet I was still blown away. Prior to Crimson Desert, my two favorite game worlds have been Cyberpunk 2077 and Red Dead Redemption 2. And don't get me wrong, these two games are still phenomenal game worlds, but technically, Crimson Desert blows these two games out of the water. It is genuinely impressive and awe-inspiring how Pearl Abyss was able to pull an incredibly detailed, varied, and massive game world like this off, and I had a blast experiencing it. Moving on to the bread and butter of the game, the gameplay. Similar to Crimson Desert's world, I think Pearl Abyss throws the kitchen sink at you in terms of gameplay systems and features. There's ranching, farming, base building and management, an in-game trade economy, mount riding and taming, fishing, 2 different types of poker games, arm wrestling, rock, paper, scissors, mining, logging, the actual combat itself, and so much more. And I think, unlike the world that was largely successful, I think gameplay-wise, Pearl Abyss is mostly successful. Starting with the combat itself, it's fantastic, but frustrating. The actual moment-to-moment combat when you're fighting hordes of enemies is probably one of the most satisfying combat systems I've ever encountered. Crimson Desert blends hack-and-slash gameplay with WWE-style wrestling finishes and Breath of the Wild-style physics-based world interaction. The game does a fantastic job of making you feel like a god when fighting these hordes of enemies. Kitting out your Cliff with all the various abilities found throughout the skill tree, and then taking him into battle and pulverizing the hordes of enemies attacking you is an incredibly satisfying feeling. Once you get past the metric ton of enemies, and eventually make it to the boss, I think the script flips on the combat tremendously. The bosses are not like the cannon fodder. They are brutally tough, almost like they're from a Souls-like game. But that relief and sense of accomplishment you feel when beating a boss in a game like Elden Ring is simply not there. I think the reason for that is twofold. For one, the bosses at times just feel unfair. Souls-like games hang their hat on the fact that the bosses might be brutally hard and you might die hundreds of times, but they're fair, meaning if you can master their movesets, predict their attacks, you can ultimately take them down. Crimson Desert's bosses do not have that same level of fairness. There were multiple occasions where I fought a boss where I genuinely felt like I was getting unfairly hit, or the movesets had no rhyme or reason to them to the point where I was getting brutally destroyed unfairly. And a lot of times, the solution to that was to cheese my way out of them, maybe spamming food so I don't die, or constantly using the force punch ability to stun them. And thus, when I inevitably beat the boss, it didn't feel satisfying. On top of that, the actual difficulty from boss to boss is incredibly variable. I found that the bosses in the main story were not nearly as hard as some of the optional bosses found throughout the world. And maybe that's a good thing, but still, it was jarring when it would take me upwards of 5 to 10 tries to beat one boss, and the next boss was basically a piece of paper that I cut through. It also detracted from that accomplished feeling you usually get from defeating bosses. The other reason is that I feel as though the combat formula and movement is not suited for a Souls-like style boss fight. Cliff is not very nimble. He has weight to him, kind of like Arthur in Red Dead Redemption 2, and so precisely moving around with him isn't very viable. Responsive controls are an absolute necessity for a game like Elden Ring, or even a more action-adventure focused game like Black Myth: Wukong, and Crimson Desert does not have that level of responsive controls. All in all though, I would still say the combat is very good. I stand by the fact that moment to moment, the combat is some of the flashiest and some of the most fun I've had in a third-person action game. That experience is hindered a little bit during the bosses, but even so, I never found myself growing tired of the combat or wanting a different experience. I enjoyed the combat throughout my runtime with the game for what it was. Moving on to some of the life sim elements of the game, I can't go into everything because this review will be even longer, but I can give a broader idea of what to expect. I don't think the phrase wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle really applies here. That's a term I hear a lot thrown around when a game feels like it has every system under the sun available for you to engage in. Crimson Desert's life sim elements and moment-to-moment gameplay is definitely wide as an ocean, but it's also surprisingly deep. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not talking Mariana Trench deep, but deep and engaging enough to keep me entertained throughout the runtime. The entirety of the life sim elements are essentially dedicated to you building your Greymane clan back up from the events at the beginning of the game. Whether that's herding cows and goats for meat and supplies, or building a farm to provide food, or decorating your house for reasons, I don't really know, there's not really an in-game incentive for this, and I think all of it is very reasonably entertaining. A lot of the side activity, especially the mining and logging, is directly used within the upgrades to your weapons and armor, so it's nice to have an additional MMO-style grindy element to the game to keep you busy as well. None of it is too grindy. I'm not spending hours upon hours logging and mining, and you can always pick up the resources from dead enemies or by completing certain quests, but it is a nice break to the questing and the combat whenever I want. Unironically, I think one of my favorite aspects of the moment-to-moment gameplay is the mission dispatches and base management. As you start finding more and more of your fellow Greymanes and you begin building up your clan once again, you get access to mission dispatching. Based on your comrades' strengths, you can send them out on certain missions for various factions or noble houses throughout the world to go and get resources or money. Whether that's through estate security or logging or farming or building various structures, managing your comrades, strategically picking out missions to maximize return, and seeing the structures your guys build in the real game world itself was super cool. I think my least favorite aspect, and one that I think is the most underbaked, is the trade economy. Throughout the game, you have the ability to build wagons and load them up with trade goods to go and sell to various traders. These are different than just the one-off loot you find throughout the game. These are specifically meant for trading, and there's an economy attached to them. Ideally, you want to buy these items low or find them throughout the world and then sell them high for maximum profit. The problem is that the return on investment in this case is just way too high. The investment in this case is your time. Oftentimes, you have to drive incredibly long distances with this fragile wagon. If you stop and stray too far from the wagon, you have to pay to get it back, and that comes with loss of product. And the actual sale prices of these trade goods is not nearly as high enough to justify the monotony. Progression is the last big pillar of the gameplay I want to talk about, and admittedly, this was the aspect of the game pre-launch that I had the most doubts about. But I can confidently say that the progression in this game is surprisingly deep and surprisingly good. Crimson Desert is not an RPG, meaning there aren't levels or XP in the traditional sense. Any progression you get is through exploration of the game world and by finding the Abyss artifacts that I mentioned earlier. These artifacts are found throughout the world through exploration and puzzle solving, through main quests and side quests, as well as through completing various challenges like killing X enemies without dying. These Abyss artifacts can be used in one of 3 skill trees. There's the combat focus one, focused on giving you more abilities to use with your swords and the wrestling moves I mentioned earlier. There's the spirit abilities that focus on long range combat using your spirit, which is basically mana. And then there's the elemental skill tree focused on combining elemental abilities. You can't really build out your Cliff in different ways. Again, this isn't an RPG. You will eventually get every ability in the game as long as you do enough exploring, but the sense of progression you get with finding these abilities and using them to make your Cliff stronger is still an incredibly compelling motivator. In addition to upgrading Cliff himself, you are also able to upgrade the various weapons you find out in the wild by using some of the resources I mentioned earlier. This is a little bit more hit or miss for me. I think this is the one area of the game where incorporating a bit more of an RPG weapon system would have been incredibly useful. Crimson Desert does a great job of providing you with unique armor sets and weapons that look incredibly cool and also have unique abilities attached to them. The problem is, due to there being no level scaling, they will almost always do less damage per second than your currently equipped weapon if you've been with that weapon for a while and have been keeping up with the upgrades. This means, in order for the new weapon to break even with the one you have already equipped, you have to use a lot of resources, some you may not even have, to bring that new weapon up to speed. On top of that, if the weapon you're currently using is already a unique one, chances are it has ability slots where you can use extra modifiers to make the weapon even more powerful or give you abilities that the weapon didn't originally come with. These modifiers are expensive to embed into your weapon, and you might not want to spend the bread to transfer those over to the new weapon that already isn't as good in DPS without upgrades. What I'm getting at is that chances are, if you find an armor set or weapon you really like, there's almost no incentive to switch it out unless you really care about aesthetics, because chances are you've already invested too many resources into that weapon. And for a game that can easily go for 100+ hours, getting variety and finding unique weapons that are clearly better off the bat compared to your earlier unique weapons would have been a nice RPG light element to add. But alas, I spent most of my playthrough with an absolute kitted out hound that wrecked everything in its path. When it comes to the gameplay as a whole, I think it's just as good, if not better, than the world itself. The world is absolutely gorgeous and packed with detail, but if the moment-to-moment gameplay wasn't there, it would be all for nothing. Thankfully, Crimson Desert's gameplay casts a wide net and stays just deep enough for me to say I enjoy the gameplay throughout my runtime, and I never really found myself getting bored. Now, would I be able to sustain this level of enjoyment for multiple hundreds of hours? I don't know, but for now, I can say I never got bored. The last aspect of this game, barely worth talking about, is the story. Now, I've reviewed some games with some fairly bad stories before. Games like Dragon Age the Veilguard or Assassin's Creed Shadows, and those stories were bad in the sense that maybe they were boring, or maybe they lacked any spectacle, or maybe they had bad dialogue. Crimson Desert takes the cake for one of the worst stories in a game I've ever played. The story isn't bad because the voice acting is bad, or even that the dialogue is disingenuous. Crimson Desert's story is bad simply because it barely makes any sense. Let's break it down from the beginning. You play as Cliff, a main member of this clan of people known as the Greymanes. This clan is quite formidable and known to have some of the best warriors in all of Payloon, and also known to be quite helpful to the people of Payloon. At the beginning of the game, your clan is attacked by a vicious gang known as the Black Bears, and most of your clan, including Cliff, are killed. But Cliff is mysteriously brought back to life by a mysterious force within the sky plane known as the Abyss, and he is told that there's an evil force threatening the balance of the Abyss, and Cliff is the only one who can stop it. The rest of the game follows you, Cliff, gathering the surviving members of the Greymane clan once again, defeating the gang that took your home and killed most of your clan, and restoring the balance in the Abyss. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. The story is so bad and just so random that I'm genuinely struggling on finding a way to communicate just how incoherent the story actually is. I guess to start, Pearl Abyss was better off letting you create your own character and having them be silent. Because as it stands right now, Cliff is basically mute. A good story predicates on the fact that the main character is an interesting guy, and that he has intrinsic motivations for setting off on the journey, and that along the way, he develops and has a satisfying character arc. Cliff has none of those things. He has no relation to the Abyss, rendering that portion of the story to have no motivation. He barely speaks and has to rely on NPCs around him to literally talk to themselves to get the point across. On top of that, the actual beats in the story itself make no sense. There's no rhyme or reason when going from one objective to the next. One moment, you may be helping a villager clean his chimney, and the next you're investigating a disturbance halfway across the map with not so much as a line of dialogue explaining it. The quest objectives themselves are also very annoying to deal with. The beginning 5 chapters or so of the main questline is almost exclusively tutorial, which adds to the randomness of the already disjointed story. And the faction side quests, particularly Grey main quests, are so cut and paste, it's frustrating. Pearl Abyss is an MMO developer. Their last game was Black Desert Online, and their quest design absolutely reflects that. The faction quests usually boil down to follow an NPC slowly by either walking or riding your horse awkwardly next to them, hearing the exposition as to why this quest matters along the way, with Cliff not having as much as a squeak to say about it. The quest giver who said they would help you in the quest leaves halfway to your destination with some bullshit excuse, leaving you to do that objective by yourself. Going to your objective and doing some menial shit like logging trees or buying groceries or clearing out a camp, coming back, getting a good job from the NPC, and getting your reward. It's a really frustrating loop that actively frustrated me throughout my playtime. And the worst part is, this isn't like a game like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, where you can largely ignore the story and do whatever the hell you want. Like I mentioned earlier, major sections of the map, many of the cool POIs, and the core gameplay loop are tied to a lot of these quests. You have to actively participate in them, and it gets really frustrating really fast. At the end of the day, I could tell where Pearl Abyss's time and effort went when making Crimson Desert. The story feels so disjointed from the incredible world and gameplay that I am confident that Pearl Abyss had to do major rewrites and major cuts to make the story work somehow. You can actively see the seams holding the story together, and that is never a good sign. All things considered though, I think it's fair to say that I gave Crimson Desert a pretty glowing review. I think the world is one of the best worlds, if not the best world I've ever experienced in a video game, and I think the gameplay backs up the world's technical achievement with some minor hiccups here and there. So why then is the title of this video and my intro for the review that Crimson Desert is the greatest game I never want to play again? And frankly, the answer is simple. Crimson Desert, simply put, has too much content. At the risk of making everything I said in this whole review obsolete with this one sentence, I think Crimson Desert at the end of the day has too much content and not a big enough catalyst to push me through another playthrough. Crimson Desert lacks a connective tissue that propels players like me into subsequent playthroughs. Crimson Desert is not an RPG. It's not Skyrim, it's not Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's not The Witcher. There is no narrative choice and consequence here, build crafting, or dialogue options within the game. Thus, there is no incentive to replay this game to discover how my choices impact the ending, or to side with one faction over another, or to build out my cliff like a mage instead of a warrior. To compare it to one of its action-adventure contemporaries, Crimson Desert may exceed in the detail and vastness that RDR2 may have, but it lacks in a compelling narrative that pushes me to replay RDR2 every so often to get that feeling again. And to be clear, Crimson Desert is not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. It is genuinely great, and I had a genuinely great time playing through it, but I've done what I've needed to do, and I've seen what I've needed to see, and there's nothing else here for me anymore other than to appreciate my time with Crimson Desert for what it was, and to genuinely recommend the game. I think this game is truly fantastic, but if you're like me, and you feel that my experience with the game resonates with how you view games, this game to me is a one-time experience. A great experience, but a one-time one nonetheless. If I were to compare this game to any real-life event, it would be a wedding. With a wedding, you spend all that time, potential years of work beforehand setting up the day, making sure everything is right, and wanting you, your partner, and your guests to have the best experience possible. When the day comes, it's a blast. Everyone has a great time, but at the end of the day, you're exhausted. You've had a great time, you've enjoyed the ride for what it was, but you hope to never go through that again because of the sheer amount of planning it took. And well, hopefully you and your partner stay together for life as well. Crimson Desert to me is like a wedding. I enjoyed the journey, I enjoyed the hundreds of hours I put into the game, playing every faction quest and discovering as much as I could in this world. But now that it's over, I don't want to go back anytime soon. Either way, that's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know down below your thoughts on Crimson Desert. I'm sure many of you are still playing through it. Did you enjoy the game? Are you enjoying the game so far? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Am I completely off base here? And is this the greatest game ever made? I want to hear everything y'all have to say down in the comments below. Again, if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that like button and please consider subscribing to see more content like this. It's been CGG. I'm out.